one of the first things we did was to design what kind of company culture we want to have. What are we recruiting for? What are we training for? What are we rewarding for? And what are the penalties if it doesn't work? My name is Asaf Navot. I'm the founder and CEO of Homemade. Homemade is a property tech startup that is focused on replacing traditional letting agents. And we operate as a hybrid letting operator, meaning that we find tenants for private landlords or institutional landlords and do the property management as well. But the way we operate is very, very different. It's a tech-enabled system that allows us to have one centralized location, so landlords don't have to pay for branch in every neighborhood and a coordinator admin in every neighborhood and so on. And it also allows us to offer different services to our providers. So de facto serving as an ecosystem for all stakeholders. So we offer value for tenants, to landlords, and to third-party providers that can tap into this market and offer the service to the customers.
Yeah, and how did you see a need for this product?
So as a tenant and as a landlord, I was constantly having bad experience with letting agents. And at the time, it was this one person did X, this one person or this one agency did Y. And the eureka moment was literally at 2 a.m. Driving a taxi on the way back from work. I was working in the strategy space at the time when it hit me that it's not the people. It's not this one agent or one agency. They just operate in a model that's no longer fit for purpose. Right? 40 years ago, if you had a better location on the high street, you could charge high fees because you had more people walking in compared to the guy in the back street. And that just doesn't matter anymore, right? Only 3-4% of tenants are actually walking. The rest is social media, property portals, pay-per-click, etc., etc. So I took a long leave of absence from a Bain company where I used to work, launched a pilot that lasted about 9 months, where I was serving as an agent doing viewing, tenancy progression, appraisals, and so on. Raised about just under $1 million at the time as pre-seed and started growing the business.
So this is something we don't actually talk a lot about in these conversations normally. You say you launched a pilot, which took, do you say 9 months? What were the things in that pilot you were looking for to say, yeah, this really works, or actually, no, it doesn't? What were the checkpoints?
Well, there were two different things. The first one is to ensure that the model or the hypothesis is indeed a good hypothesis. And the second, to ensure that people that the users, the customers, actually need what we offer them. So the way I approached it was very similar to the way they used to work in the strategy space, where large private equity funds would approach us as a consultant and ask, should we invest $500 million into this company? And you would look at the market, the customer base, or the operating model, and so on and so on. So the way I looked at it was in the same way. I'm investing here, but I'm investing my time, my the alternative career that I could take, and so on. So it's pretty clearly laid out in a way that there's an element around the market, there's a need, the market is growing, decentralized, fragmented, and so on and so on. It was clear that customers are not getting what they want to get, right? Which is high quality service, it's at a fair price with all the add-ons and professionalism. So the main aspect of the hypothesis or the pilot was running, well, one, around the fact that can we do it in a different way? And secondly, can we do it in a profitable way? So the pilot purpose was around ensuring we can do those two things. One, that we can scale a differentiated business, and second, we can do it in a way that generates profits and doesn't turn into de facto charity for landlords. So one of the outcomes of this pilot was that we decided not to do sales, and we decided not to start with property management, two very different businesses. We later on expanded to do property management when we were in mature enough place as a business. So that was the main purpose of the pilot. The second one was to showcase to potential investors the same hypothesis, right? To show that we have the evidence to support the hypothesis. And that was the evidence that allowed me to raise the money pre-seed.
And I guess by having those parameters in place and targets you wanted to hit yourself to prove it worked, did that make it all the easier to raise the funds and to be able to go to these investors and justify it?
It worked very well with some investors, right? Sophisticated investors just want to talk to our customers, just want to show, to see the operating model, No one ever asked, is the market big enough, or people really suffer from working with traditional letting agents. That was given. Most people assume that it's a very low burden of truth or proof, really. So the main focus area when we were doing the funding was to ensure that we're indeed differentiated, and indeed that our revenue growth is going to be sustainable and not buying growth, right? We want to make sure that we're not, for every pound of revenue, it will cost us 10 pounds in cost. So with most of the early investors, it was a big part of our ability to, even to show my commitment, right? I left behind a professional service career where instead of working for a large employer, well-branded and so on, to go in and actually walk the walk and take the viewings, which I wasn't good at, do the tenancy progression, do the whole set of services. And they knew that I'm very much committed to carrying on with that service. For example, when I resigned, it was before we got the funding, right? And it was just after the Brexit referendum. And it was a good testimony for our investors that I'm going to take their money all the way and use it with the best intention. I'm not going to let go 3 months, or I'm leaving some sort of an escape route after that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like you raised the funds fairly early on to make sure you had the right tech in place and the right people around you to really make it happen. So what were the steps for you immediately after securing the funds? What were the things you had to put in place to make this really work?
Well, it was quite a lot. It was quite intense at the time. So the first step was to make sure we have the right team in place. What are the key functions? What are the functions you need to have early on? These are relatively expensive resources. You want to make sure they're the right people, that they have the right tools, and so on. Second part was to make sure that the blueprint is there from a value perspective. So one of the first things we did was to design what kind of company culture we want to have. What are we recruiting for? What are we training for? What are we rewarding for? And what are the penalties if it doesn't work? So that was the second part. Only then we went and developed a very basic tech platform. So what was at the time the MVP? And that was the stage where we were ready to go and scale. In hindsight, one of the things that I would probably should have done, was to go a bit earlier towards growth. So making sure the model is good enough and we can scale it, because either way, the next stage will be more challenging as well. So it's going to require some redesign either way. So that's one thing that I would have changed.
Absolutely. And you mentioned company culture there. So I think, as most founders find, it's straightforward enough when you've got a few employees, but as you've done and you've scaled very quickly, I think you mentioned right before we jumped on this call that you've actually doubled the team in the last sort of 7 or 8 months. What are the challenges with keeping the company culture then, particularly when everyone's remote due to COVID?
Right. It's probably our biggest threat as a company at the moment, to dilute our company culture. So the risk for us, I mean, we have a team of 60. We need to add another 30 employees in the next month or so. And one of the biggest challenges we have is that we can easily dilute the company culture by having the person who joins us 2 weeks from now, learning from the person who joined us this week, who learned from the person who joined 2 weeks ago. So we have this Chinese whispering of what do we stand for, or our way of doing things. So the way we address it is through relatively intense training. I always run the onboarding session where we manage expectation of what are the values, what are the trade-offs when it comes to values. And there's always an emphasis on making sure that who are the people you should ask if you're not sure about our way of doing things. We communicate a lot. We have every 2 weeks, we have a company meeting where we repeat and focus on Zoom on one of the values. We make sure the incentives are aligned to the values. There are repeating training sessions that are linked to that. And in general, we encourage people to provide feedback and become culture ambassadors with new joiners. So it's very common for people here to go and say, here's a piece of advice, our way of doing things a bit different. This is what I would do, right? It's a big part of what we stand for, and it's a big part of our mission. The second part is obviously around how do you make sure that you signal to everyone what it means to be the right culture ambassador. One of the only way to be promoted, the only way to be promoted in Homemade is yes, you need to be a strong performer, but you also need to communicate the culture internally. You have to be a culture symbol, and you have to communicate the culture externally. You have to be promoted by your customers. So whenever we have promotions, and since the beginning of the year, we had about 6 or 7 promotions already, we talk about the value of that culture and how they showcase the culture. and that signals to new joiners what it takes to get to move forward here.
Yeah, really interesting. And let's take that a step backwards then. So, when bringing people on board, what are the real challenges and what are the things you really look out for when recruiting?
So we look at different things. We look always the basic scorecard for each person joining us is always around competence, client skills or communication skills, and fit with the team, which is the biggest part. But the other things we look at are one, sustainability. Right? Are they going to can they fit with the team, with the vision? Do they will they do well in the role? Are they okay with coping with the risk that is associated with working in a startup? Secondly, you always need to have someone who champions each individual joining the company, right? So at the end of each interview, each interviewer would be asked, would you hire the person? Would you champion? You need to have at least a few people say, I must have this person. The worst case you could have is that you have 5 people say like, yeah, sure. And that means that you're now compromising. It takes one person to say no and we'll stop the process, right? We need to make sure that, again, we have the right people, even if it means slightly slower recruitment process, hence the lack of 30 people. And so that's a big part of our recruitment process. We also try to always mimic some sort of work environment with key hires. We'll run a workshop. We'll run through the first 90 days, design it together with them to ensure that, one, they know what it means and they have the granularity of the job description, but also that we both parties have the chance to work together.
Mm. And obviously the team is something that changes massively when you're scaling, particularly when you're scaling so quickly. What were the other aspects of the business that suddenly changed as you were scaling? And was there anything that caught you off guard as that process was happening?
There are always things to surprise you. So I think for every stage we had different challenges or different aspects that evolved. If I look at the market or how growth was non-linear, right? We had steps where you move all of a sudden you have a boost of growth. It's always linked to the top of the funnel. So it's either that you manage to get a new source of leads or crack some or business development, or that it's in the middle of the funnel where your operational capabilities allow you to process and get good results in a faster way. When I look back in our growth plan, there are also external factors, right? So it could be a market, it could be the decline of a competitor or something like that. More specifically, if we look at the last year, we'll be able to park the tragedies that are taking place in the market, people dying, recession, loneliness, mental health concerns, and so on. COVID placed us in a place that is quite unique. It allowed us to operate in a digital way, in a better way than the traditional agents that didn't know how to cope with the high street presence. You can't really take someone in a Mini Cooper if you're used to that. It made our customers, the large build-to-rent funds, a bit more open to the idea of working with someone as innovative as us. So all of a sudden, funds that always said, I'm going to work on my own, were more open to the idea of working with a company like ours. And once we got the results, it moved very quickly from one site to 10 sites to 20 sites and so on with each client. So again, funds that a year ago would never rely on, no one was ever fired for in a property fund for hiring a traditional Savills, Knight Frank and so on. But taking such a bet on a company like ours is something that is less, let's call it traditional by them. So all of a sudden with COVID and all the uncertainties that came with it, they were more open to the idea. And once we were there and able to show our value, it allowed them to quickly move again to extend us to the whole portfolio. And on top of that, the ability to recruit. When there was 3%, 4% unemployment rate a year and a half ago, recruitment was much slower. It was much harder to get people to run through the process and commit. And again, unfortunately for the market, but fortunately for us as a company, the much higher unemployment rate allowed to recruit a large number of people very, very quickly. We were able to recruit entire teams from hospitality, from travel, from leisure, from consumer goods as well.
And how's all this change affected your role within the business as the founder? How's that changed?
Well, my role keeps evolving all the time. And the first stage, the concern was, or the main focus there was around how do you make it a reality, right? There's a burden of proof that does it really work? Then it was around funding. Can you persuade people to believe in your vision? The next stage was, can you get number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in the company, right? And then it was around go-to-market. Now it's very much about redesigning the the operating model as we scale. Whatever works for us when we were 30 team members is very different when we're 60. Whatever works for us in London is very different where we now just expanded to Manchester, Liverpool, and another city. So it's completely reimagining the business from scratch. So you have to just start from a blank sheet of paper and redesign how the business works. The next stage will be very much around the product and the scalability. This time next year, we should be in another country. So that means we're going to have to redesign the whole model and the product to an entirely different audience, different language, different geography, different market dynamics, different channels, a different cost base, and so on.
Yeah, and obviously with that, so launching a new country, looking to bring on another 30 people almost immediately, a lot happening. So what are the key goals and key milestones you're aiming for over the next 12 months?
We have different aspects that we're targeting, right? The first one is around there's an amount of we're in the process of a large funding round. So once this has been completed, we've been in a position to scale faster. The second part is we have to maintain the profitable unit economics that we operate in. A lot of property tech startups have a business that will only become profitable at a very large scale. Our model is constantly focused around maintaining the profitability at any single level, right? So very high gross margin rate. So that's something that we remain focused on despite of the stage we're in. In the next 12 months, we have different challenges. One is around expanding geographically. One is around scaling the team without diluting the culture, performance, and the caliber of individuals. And the next challenge is 3 months from now is how do you create this mid-level or another layer in the organization? How do you bring people that never worked in property, never worked with homemade, and you don't just allow them to be leaders in the business, you also make sure that they have all the know-how and skills to communicate to dozens of other people our values, our ways of doing things, and so on. So that's a key challenge, right? It's not how you recruit the 30 that we're missing now, is how do you recruit another 80 people in the next 12 months and create the layers that allow them to thrive in this setting.
And I think there's always that challenge as well, particularly if you're looking to expand geographically, particularly within another country, is balancing your culture with the culture locally, but making sure that that's consistent across the whole business. So have you put much thought to that yet, or is that something that you think will be out when it's a bit closer in time?
We'll have to do it a bit closer in time. The values are universal, right? Customers will always, our company values will not change based on the geography. It's just the balance and how this is being interpreted by the customers is different. Customers will always come first. We'll always have to be resourceful. It's always going to be a team sport. It's never going to be individual, right? We always try to breed leaders in the organization. It's always going to be around allowing and empowering people's decisions. There's always going to be around integrity. These things will not change. The way that the local culture potentially interprets that is a bit different, right? Resourcefulness means different things in different cultures, and we'll have to adjust it once we decide on what's the next geography. We already know what's going to be the next geography, but we need to make sure that we review it just before we make a decision, because again, things change over time.
Sounds like an exciting time in the business. So for those watching, where can they find out more about Homemade and yourself?
Well, if your customers reach out to us and talk to our team, people who are would like to look for a job, then our career page is available on the website. And the people who are looking for partnership, potential investors or potential, let's call it senior hires, then again, just feel free to reach out to me directly, and we would like to discuss.